Today, I'd like to present off-path injection attacks on USB communications. This work was a collaboration between the University of Adelaide, the Department of Defence of Australia, Georgia Tech, and Royal University Brockham. And in this work, we demonstrate a novel hardware-based USB exploit, using which we're able to circumvent existing defences against USB-based attacks. So to give a bit of background, USB nowadays is the de facto standard for connecting peripherals to computers. And since its introduction in the 90s, there's been 4 major versions of the standard, each of which with their own various speed modes, electrical interfaces, and connector types. However, a few things have remained constant about the standard over time. Namely, the way that devices connect to a single host is with a tree topology. So the host sits at the root. Hubs expand the number of potential connection points, and devices sit at the leaves. Backward compatibility has been built into every version of the standard. So like you can see in the diagram here, you can have devices with multiple versions all working on the same system at once. And the shared bus is host arbitrated. So all communications across USB are always initiated by the host, and the host will probe one device at a time in a periodic manner to communicate with all devices in a bandwidth sharing sort of fashion. So to expand on the way USB works, I'll describe the communication model. So here we've got a situation with 2 devices connected to a common host. The host, if it wants to query one of the devices for input, will do so by broadcasting a message to all hosts and calling out the keyboard saying, "Hey keyboard, give me input." The keyboard will respond with a keystroke, and then the host will terminate the transaction with an acknowledgement. And so none of these communications are encrypted across the bus either, which is also important to keep in mind. And over the course of USB's development, the factors that have always been prioritized are ease of use and low cost of implementation. So security has often been disconsidered. So here we summarize all of the built-in security measures that we have with USB. And moving on, so this opens the door to a range of possible attacks. The most notorious of which is probably masquerading attacks. So in these attacks, you have a seemingly innocent-looking device like a USB stick or the rubber ducky here, which you might be familiar with. They'll connect to a host and perform some sort of unexpected function. Typically, this function will be to emulate a keyboard and deliver a malicious payload via keystroke inputs. This exploits the default trust that computers place in anything that connects over USB. So they simply believe the device is whatever the device identifies as. And it also exploits a gap between what devices actually do and what users think that devices will do. So our go-to defense to these sort of attacks is to employ some sort of firewall-like approach. And that's typically retrofit into software. So hence this feature is not a built-in feature of USB. This is something people will build into their host systems. And usually they'll implement this to allow connections to previously seen devices that are known to be trusted while rejecting all else. And going back to the communication model, some other security issues with the communication standard are that using devices plugged in alongside one another, so in this instance, we have the keyboard and a USB stick plugged alongside it, the USB stick can snoop some of the traffic that goes back and forth to the keyboard. And similarly, the hub, which sits on the path of connection for both of these devices, can both snoop and manipulate the traffic via man-in-the-middle type mechanisms. So in our work, we demonstrate that off-path devices, so in this case, the USB stick, can not only snoop, but also manipulate the traffic of other devices on the same system. So we build an injection-capable device, which sits on the bus alongside a victim keyboard, and when the host probes the victim keyboard requesting input, our injector is configured to send a keystroke much quicker than the victim will send its own genuine data. The victim also sends its own genuine data a bit later, but the hub will be busy forwarding the initially received transmission up to the host, and so it'll essentially block out what comes from the genuine device, effectively performing a DOS on that victim as well. And then rather conveniently, to top it all off, the host sends an acknowledgement which will falsely lead the victim to believe that all is well, and that there's no need to even resend the data that never actually reached the host. And so this is what I'll try to demonstrate today. Here we have a FPGA board. I'll just hold that up a bit without breaking connections. And this board, we have it configured to perform the logical function of a USB mouse. And so if I just open up the package here, this software is USB Device Tree Viewer, which is a software which allows you to view the entire connection hierarchy of USB on Windows machines. So I'll connect the USB 2 hub. Let me just pull that out and reconnect. So we have a generic USB 2.1 hub there, to which we connect our USB keyboard. This keyboard here, which traveled all the way from Australia with me. This keyboard is the victim. We plug in the mouse as well, which, bear with me a moment. So our FPGA is behaving like a mouse here, and we're able to use this mouse connection to inject keystrokes on behalf of the keyboard's interface, hopefully. And we do this to open a command shell. Now, to complete the magic trick, if I disconnect the victim keyboard and press the same buttons on the mouse, then the keyboard interface is no longer there to be injected through. So you'll have to take my word that I press those buttons again. Okay. So the impact of this mechanism is that under scenarios where a host is configured with some sort of firewall policy in its software or in its operating system, we assume that a user will still explicitly trust some interface. You know, they might want to use some keyboard or some USB stick. Otherwise, they might as well glue shut all of their USB ports. And so in the face of one of these firewall policies, we have an attacker-controlled device which will be untrusted by default by such a firewall policy. And at the hardware layer, this untrusted device will be able to inject communications on behalf of the trusted interface, thus circumventing the firewall policy, the firewall defense. So the impact is that we can exploit any USB interface which is explicitly trusted in software. We find just under half of all hubs tested to be vulnerable to our injection exploit. Some motherboards are also found vulnerable. We perform two concrete attacks, the first of which keystroke injection, like you've seen today. In another case, we also hijack the installation of an operating system during a boot from USB stick. So instead of having a victim keyboard and attacking mouse, we have a similar situation with a victim USB stick, which has our OS image that we want to boot from. And alongside it, we place a serial over USB device, which injects communications once that boot image starts to get loaded from the USB stick. And so we're able to force our own operating system image onto the computer. We also test it against a range of different software-based firewall-like policies. Some of these are academic software, some commercial solutions, and even virtualization technology. So as with any other hardware exploit, we're also able to cross virtualization boundaries. And with this being the discovery of a relatively significant vulnerability, we performed responsible disclosure, contacting all affected parties, namely the USB Implementers Forum. This is the organization responsible for overseeing the development of the standard of USB, And we also contacted vendors of affected hubs and software. Of the 14 parties we contacted, unfortunately, 5 of them didn't get back to us at all, and particularly unfortunately, the USB Implementers Forum was among them. Those that responded, we then sent through a report detailing our findings. This was probably about 2 years ago now, and it seems like 5 technical teams still assessing our findings, supposedly. And of those 4 who finalized the responsible disclosure process, we got rather dismissive answers in some cases. So to summarize, we present a novel hardware-level signal injection exploit using which we can bypass existing software-based protections against known USB attacks. We demonstrate 2 concrete attacks, in one case injecting keystrokes against a trusted keyboard using an adjacent mouse, and in another case, hijacking the installation of an OS image using an adjacently connected serial device. We also make our keystroke injector source RTL available at our GitHub, and I invite you to please read our paper if you're interested in more details. Thank you.